annual Houston, Calgary, Utah,
Mm-hmm.
Park Cities, Utah, and this fall here in Santa Fe, October 3rd at the Academy for the Love of Learning. It's a free event. She's also the owner of Pravana Yoga Studio with her husband Richard here in Santa Fe, and she's also very active with the Memory Care Alliance. And I've asked her to talk to us about how we might reduce some of our stress in a positive manner and apply a little self-care so we can begin to manage our own situations, because first rule of caregiving applies to us as well. We're not any good to anybody else. We're not any good to anyone in the community, the people we help, if we don't take care of ourselves. So Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good. Thanks, David. The first thing I would like to do is really just ask how you are. So if you know, or you're comfortable with chatting in the chat box, so I'll pose it as this. If you were to describe how you are today as a type of weather forecast, so is it, partly cloudy, sunny? Is there like a thunderstorm? Is it snowing? What is your weather today? Peter says it's warm and sunny. If you want to think about that just for a second, you can either think to yourself or you can share it with me in the chat box if you like. Has anyone ever thought about their emotion or emotional state as being like the weather? You can kind of nod. There's also a really great feature, reaction feature, which gives you a thumbs up or a clapping. And Barg says, windy, a lot of stirring. Oh, wow. And blue skies, bright and sunny. You're on a staycation. That's nice. Warm and sunny. Wow. Okay. So we have a lot of optimistic and bright weather forecasts today. And it's certainly okay if it's not. My morning around, partly cloudy. My morning this morning was pretty stormy, actually, if I'm really, really honest. Okay. So a lot of times I'll do, and I'll do this with my son often, actually. If he were, either weather or this one, because he's a numbers kid, he likes math a lot. He'll say, I'll ask him, if you were to sort of give me a temperature scale, 100 being really hot, boiling over, maybe it's too much, today's too much, angry, 90 degrees, 100 degrees. So we're gonna be in Fahrenheit today, to lower. So kind of a numbers scale and asking people how they are, because you can just leave it at that. And it gives you a really good sense of kind of what's happening in a group setting. And I use it a lot with my 14-year-old. So it gives me a feeling of kind of where he is that day. It's another great opportunity for you to check in perhaps with a loved one, or if you've got someone that's sort of your buddy, that your go-to person of, this is someone you check in with often. I have a group chat with some girlfriends who live all across the United States, and we do the weather check-in. And it's great because it gives us a very quick snapshot. So just as David mentioned, I'm pretty passionate about caregivers. My father was a caregiver to my stepmom who had early onset Alzheimer's and passed away just a few years ago. And she was here in Santa Fe, actually. And my family has just recently moved here to be closer to my dad. So I feel really, really fortunate. My dad is in excellent health, but I also feel a strong sense of care for him. And so we have been sheltering in place very stringently, as I'm sure many of you have, so that I can continue to connect with my dad on a daily basis or as I need to. But being here has been an incredible opportunity to really get back to the heart of why I started the caregiver retreats. They're not a yoga retreat. It's not anything like that necessarily. It's really all about wellness. And I think at the heart of it, whether you are a caregiver for a loved one of dementia or Alzheimer's, or you simply care for another family member, whether they're younger or older, or you're a resource for a neighbor. I mean, in all ways, we are a caregiver if we are connected to others. So these aspects and principles of wellness are really simple, yet really difficult to implement. So if we think about what the keys of wellness are, it's the obvious stuff. It's nutrition. You know, what we're putting in is what we'll get out of our body. It's sleep. I don't know how many of you are struggling with sleep right now. You can give me a thumbs up or a yeah, quite a few. And I am too. And you know, I'm someone who teaches the tools. And I think that just speaks to what the global emphasis of this has been, that the stress becomes something out of our home and out of what we can actually control. And so the things that we can begin to manage, the things that are regulatory for our nervous system, are, you know, hopefully sleep. We can control what time we go to bed, actually. We can decide if we put our phone in our room or not. We can remove the electronics out. Some of the other things that have really helped me have started using an eye mask. Rather than waiting till I wake up and something has woken me up, I'll put it on, you know, in the beginning. Also, a little bit of white noise helps me because I'm super sensitive to even my dog getting up and moving from place to place at night. So there's lots of little techniques, and I've actually created a little sheet for you all that I'll put in the comments, and then I'll leave with someone to get out to you guys, as well as the link to our call today as well. So when you think about all of the things, it's nutrition, it's sleep, and I'm sure you guys could probably guess a big one is exercise. How many of you are getting outside or at least moving around most of the day or some of the day? Yeah. Has it helped your mood? Yes. It is. The brain research and the brain science is absolute on this. There's probably nothing better that you can do besides sleep and nutrition is exercise and the blood flow to the brain. It's absolutely essential. And so what I would suggest to you, even as we are on Zoom a lot, probably more than we've ever done in our entire lives, or online so much, even if you're even I'll invite you, even as you're listening, if you feel the need that you need to stand up and kind of move and stretch a little bit, I would invite you to do that. I was a little concerned when my son was starting school online. A teacher actually said, "Hey, sit down and pay attention." And I thought, wait a minute, that's exactly what they're doing all day. No wonder my son is getting up to the kitchen and getting water and getting something to drink all the time, because he needs to move, right? They're used to moving between classes, and our bodies are designed to move. I'd love to do a really simple exercise with you all if you're willing. Yes? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. So along with exercise, the way to control the nervous system is actually through breath. So if our breath is autonomic, thank God we don't have to tell ourselves to breathe in and out all day long. Our body just simply does it. But what we can do is actually control that autonomic system by changing the pattern of our breath. By extending your expiration of breath, or your exhales, that actually is the regulatory part of your nervous system. Your inhale energizes you, your exhale calms you, and you're in and out all day long. And so essentially there's a sense of balance and equilibrium. When we're in a hyper state of stress, that inhale stays in our upper chest, tends to, and our breaths are much shorter. or perhaps we're contracted, which means our diaphragm has to work so much harder to take that inhale and that exhale. So that's why getting up and moving around and having more access to the diaphragm is also super important. So we're just going to simply take 5 breaths together. You can have your eyes open or closed. I actually really enjoy practicing this with my eyes open because it's real. It's realistic, right? So if we're in a grocery line or if you're sitting there with someone, they don't even need to know that you're taking 5 breaths to calm down a little bit. It's something that you can do absolutely anywhere, and it requires just paying attention to that part. So we'll do it together. So exhale completely right here. So just release your exhale. Take an inhale, breathe in through the nose. So breathing in, and you can exhale through the nose or the mouth. Exhale for as long as you can. Let it go for as long as you can. Gentle inhale. So breathing in again, breathe in. And then exhale just for as long as you can without forcing till you find the end. Good, 3 more. Breathing in together. This time as you exhale, notice what in your body might be softening right now. And 2 more. On this last breath, imagine the breath where you can feel your feet. So as you breathe in, notice how that enlivens you. As you exhale, can you imagine the breath going all the way to your feet? Good. And just go back to a natural breath. Does anyone feel a little bit better than when before we started? Yeah, John does. Good, Dee Dee. So simple, and it took you 30 seconds, right? So again, the key is expiration is longer than your inhale so that we tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that creates rest. It aids in digestion. It improves your immunity system. It increases also the oxygen intake so that the blood flow through the body, right, is purified. I could go on and on about the benefits to the brain. So one other thing I wanted to share with you, which I have found extremely helpful. I'm also a mindfulness educator. If you've heard of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, there's probably a lot of things that you could do online right now, which are inexpensive or free if you're interested in learning more about mindfulness. It's a very simple, again, working with the regulatory system of the breath and our nervous system. When we're looking at regulating breath, there's something called heart rate variability, and that's actually essentially what we're looking for. How can I quickly begin to recognize? So if I can start to observe whatever my little trigger is, I'm sure none of you have any triggers. Whatever that little, and then immediately shine a flashlight back when I'm triggered with stress or when I'm triggered with this, whatever this is. I feel like a lot of times I'll get tightness in my chest. That's where my trigger goes to. Actually, most of the time it goes right on the top of my shoulders, and I feel like I'm carrying a ton, like a backpack. And so sometimes a little bit of movement works really well, or just simply taking a moment to notice, I feel the backpack again. I'll take my 5 breaths. So whatever it is you can do to kind of get that little bit of, whatever I feel, that's the first indication of how you can begin to turn just the sensation and from growing into an emotional response, such as anger or extreme frustration. It's starting to catch it when it's before it grows or before it has time to really set in. Does that make sense? So the thing that I use that we'll often use or teach actually even to healthcare workers, it is the simplest thing. It's taking one step and then another and then pause to breathe. So if you're moving, let's say you're moving between rooms, or even if you're sitting, you can just get up, and it's a 2-step breath, that's what we call it. So you just step 1, step 2, and take a breath. Take 1, 2, and then take a breath. So I'll encourage you when we leave our call today. I'd love for you actually to get up now and walk around, but I'll encourage you when we leave our call today to try this. And maybe a great way to remember it will be whenever you get up from being seated, 1, 2, take a breath. Another way to do it is before you enter a room. So if you're about to interact with another loved one that's in your house, or whether you're about to get on the phone with someone, or whatever the situation is, changing rooms could be that step breath. 1, 2, and breathe. So I think, and the last practice I'll share with you, which I think really kind of sums this up, is a practice on the go. So if you think about what even daily activities that you do, which we do a lot of, washing hands, I assume, how can that be something that I'm completely absorbed in? When we are focused on the energy of the past, all the stuff that has happened that is sort of causing our backpack to get really heavy, or when we're concerned or worried about the future. I love David mentioned he was on a call yesterday, and one of the big topics that came up was comfort. We're lacking in comfort. And I would interpret that, David, even deeper. There's a lack of sense of safety. Where's our safety net? And that safety net sort of feels like it's got either holes in it, or some of you, today it's pretty strong. It's warm and sunny today, so your safety net feels pretty good. And that's also really normal. Day to day, your safety net's going to feel really different, right? Because we're so individual. But that lack of comfort, or that lack of safety. So how do we resource within us, right? Within us, to handle and cope with the things that are going to be coming at us, and the things that we're already still clinging to. And that's staying present. So the way to stay present is focus on the breath, or simply focus on whatever it is that you're doing fully in the moment. So right now, I'm really excited. I'm looking at each one of you. I've been on many Zoom calls where I do not see the quality of tension that I'm seeing right now. So I have to commend you. Your quality of attention is excellent. I've been on calls where someone is, on their phone and writing and doing all of these things at once. And our brains, the latest research, isn't that we actually can multitask. It can't. What it's doing is it's task switching. So your ability to focus on any one thing becomes decreased. So the more that we can simply be present with whatever that activity is, it becomes a way and a tool for us to calm ourselves, to regulate, to go back to a sense of safety and comfort. So I don't know if you want to share, you could type in the chat box. Is there something maybe you already do that is that kind of meditative experience for you? I'll share a few of mine. One is folding laundry. I love it. I can fold laundry all day. Send me your laundry. And it becomes meditative for me. I can really just be with that laundry. The other thing I'm really good at meditating with is pulling weeds. I can be out there. My son and I will go for a walk. We do family walks every day together. And he's just in routine. He goes, bye, because he knows I'm going to stay in the yard and pull weeds when we're done. So that pulling weeds, I'm so present with it that I'm not worried about what's going to happen next or what I've just finished doing. Is there something that you do that becomes a meditation for you? You can type it there in the chat if you like. Long walks with your dog each morning. Yeah, it's good. Dog walks are good for me too. I've actually found I have two coping mechanisms with that. When I feel really, really anxious, and even dog walking feels like not enough, sometimes I'll put in a really soothing talk. I listen to a lot of Tara Brach, actually. She's a Buddhist meditation teacher. And just even hearing her voice come on, it's like, okay. And I can get lost in her and what she's sharing with me. And when I come back, I invariably feel better. Most of the time, if I can just get out and move, that I do feel better. Reading your daily devotions before you start your day. Scratching your daughter's back at night while she's going to sleep. That's lovely. Yeah, yeah. And all of that attention is focused on comfort for her, right? And that's beautiful. The other one that it's a lovely practice for me is actually making coffee. So I have a really certain way. I'm sure if you were all to type in your preferences for coffee, tea, or your favorite beverage, you would all have a very specific preference. But it's a ritual. It's a ritual, and so there's nothing really going on except the way that I do that. So there's a lot that I could share with you, and I hope that this has been helpful. The key takeaway for me and to share with you and what I'm learning of how to cope with stress is simplicity, keeping it simple. It doesn't have to be really complicated at all. You don't have to go and sit down in meditation for 30 minutes. It's really simply finding something that is soothing for you, that gives you a sense of comfort and ease, and being present with that. Finding a very simple breathing practice, even if it's just taking 5 breaths, and knowing that you can turn back to that at any time. And it's like anything. I wouldn't ask you to go run out a marathon tomorrow, right? I would ask you to start, let's just walk around the block, see how that goes. Then you do that and build up. So with any practice, I believe that this stress reduction is a practice. With any practice, it takes adaptation. So before I leave you, I'm going to encourage you. You can either put it in the chat box, or you can write it down. But I'm going to ask for a really small commitment. So you can either just type yes, or if you want to make a note, what will you do today? Is there one thing that you can implement today that's simple? Might just be breath, might be taking 5 breaths. Maybe that's that 2-step practice as you move between rooms. Maybe it's continuing your daily reading or walking the dog. So just either you can jot down yes in the chat box if you like, I commit to doing something every day, or you can write it down on your desk as a commitment. But not just hearing it and thinking about it, a step further of writing the commitment down. And then my last suggestion will be to you is to find someone to tell this to today. So if you talk to anyone else today, it could be maybe you pick up the phone and check on someone. How are you? Share with them one thing that you learned. It doesn't even have to be from this. It can be from Peter's talk or anything. Anytime you share something that you've just recently learned, you have actually increased your ability to remember it by more than 60%. It will stick with you that much more. So whatever it is that you're taking in online, or whatever you're deciding to learn or expand, or maybe you're not, maybe again, it's just a stress reduction, share it with someone else, and you'll be much more likely to actually follow through with that commitment. So in the very beginning of our chat box, I put in there our website address, which is caregiver, without the S, caregiverwellnessretreat.com. And as David said, it is actually on, I hope, October 3rd. We're going for it. I'm going to assume the world will be moving in the direction of gatherings at that point. It is something that I am, besides my kids, most proud of in my life. It is an honor to give back to caregivers of Alzheimer's and other dementia. It is such an unsung task and responsibility in our world. And I am truly, truly proud and committed to do this. The retreats are completely free. They are geared toward the family caregiver, but we do ask that if facilities or assisted living places, for example, were to participate, that they send a representative. And also, David and I have been chatting. I know David is working to cultivate a program to go into those facilities and offer all of these wellness tools and things. So offer additional support, which he does all day, every day anyway. It's a thankless and tiring job, and I'm so proud of the support that our community has. It's fantastic. Before I go, is there any questions that you guys have, or anything that sort of pops to mind?
Ken, do you want to unmute everybody just for a few, if anybody has a question?
You can also unmute yourself if you like.
Yeah, you can click your unmute.
Yeah. Dee Dee, did you have a question?
Only just to follow up, you're going to send us an email, something in writing so I can remember.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to attach it right now. I've got a PDF and I just sent it. So if you look in the chat box, you can click on that to open, and you can save it onto your computer. So that has actually has a little bit more. There's a few more practices that we didn't go over that will be there for you. And Ken, you can actually just take that and load it and put it up with the other. I did mention actually a couple of books as well, which I find phenomenal. There is a great new book called The XX Brain that focuses on women's health and women's brain health. And it is fantastic. A lot of it's current research, and it's just really, really fantastic. One of my favorite books, if you have the ability to invest, they're inexpensive. They're like $5.99, but they're by Thich Nhat Hanh, which is a Buddhist meditation teacher, and they're very small little books. They're how to love, how to fight, how to walk, how to eat. There's several of them. How to relax. I think there should be at least 5 or 6 of them. How to Love is my favorite. Very, very simple. My husband and I actually read it together when we were dating, and we had a little bit of a long distance relationship when we were first dating, and we would answer questions back and forth, but it was a lot of thought provoking and beautiful mindfulness meditation, and simple. So simple. So you're welcome, Jolene. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much. It's truly an honor to be here. I'm really grateful that David and Ken invited me, and I'm going to excuse myself because my other life is teaching yoga. So I have class at 12:30 on Zoom. So I'll be doing that in just a few minutes. So thank you all, and I wish you well.
Okay, thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah. So you mentioned what your triggers are, and I just wrote down 3 quick ones here that are mine, just for an example. One is when I get overwhelmed. The second is plague, and the third is economic fallout. And I think we're all a little worried about the last 2. So I have asked Peter Murphy to join us, and he is a certified financial planner, educator, and advisor here in Santa Fe with Financial Partners. And I've asked him if he could just give us a professional's opinion on where we are, what it might look like in the future, and what we might need to prepare for. So Peter, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our group today.
You're welcome, David. And John, thank you for inviting me. And Jolene, it's good to see you. It's been a while. So, of course, where are we today? Well, there's a big difference between the stock market and our economy. Our economy has basically been shut down by most every governor in our country. And the real question is, how do we come out of this, and when do we come out of this? And it seems like everyone has a different opinion. But I will just say that regardless of all the different opinions, it's going to take time. And we can see Georgia jumping right back into it where they're not going to have any social distancing at all, or compared to what Texas is looking at doing, which is a fairly aggressive plan, but incorporating a lot of things that the federal government considers effective. And I guess we're just going to compare. As far as our state, I really haven't heard how we're going to come out of this yet. I'm sure the governor is working on a plan. If I look at just the stock market, I'll just start there to begin with. The stock market, if we look at just stocks like the Russell 3000, if you're not familiar with that, that's 3,000 of the largest companies in America. And they're down about 15% in value from the beginning of the calendar year. The S&P 500, which might be more familiar to many of you, that's 500 of the largest companies in America. They're down about the same, a little bit less, 14%. Over the course of the calendar year. And they're guessing at when we're going to recover from this. And the recovery is going to take time. And it's going to be in phases. At least that's what the prediction is. Anything is possible, but that's the prediction. Some facts just to think about. 98% of businesses in our country are small businesses. Now, any of you have businesses? Just raise your hand if you have your own business. Yeah, a fair amount of you do. And they're not small businesses like your business and my business. They could have 500 employees. So a small business can actually be a fairly decent size. Like Thornburg here in New Mexico has 258 employees, roughly. They're a small business. And so if you look at small businesses, 98% of our businesses in the country are small. And on average, they have about 27 days worth of cash. And the question's going to be, how long are we going to go through this pain, and how many of them are going to just never open their doors again? And the predictions are, and they're just predictions, if the recovery starts, our economic recovery, people start going back to work by, let's say, the end of May, then somewhere around 10 to 12% of those businesses will never come back online. If it's the end of June, now we're a little over 15%, and that progression will continue. So, and many of you might be in that situation right now, like, how do I survive until then? And I look at it as this started towards the end of February. There's been a lot of intervention from the federal government and the states. And so a lot of people, particular employees who have lost their job, they've filed for unemployment. And the numbers there are quite staggering. As a matter of fact, let me just share some of those numbers with you. Bring this up here. At the end of February, I think it was the end of February here, there were just 609. So at the end of March 7th, there were 609 claims for unemployment throughout our whole state. The end of March, that was 27,800 people filed claims for unemployment. And unemployment was extended up to 39 weeks. So people on unemployment will be somewhat protected for 39 weeks. The federal government is kicking in an extra $600 per person, and that goes out to the last of July. So it's basically 16 weeks. So people in that category who have lost their jobs, many of them have lost income. Some actually are making a little bit more income just because of the way the federal government threw that $600 a week addition out there. And it's because basically the states do their own unemployment, and a lot of them couldn't quite figure out how to do it together. And so the federal government just threw that money out there. They'll be okay for about 16 weeks and a little bit beyond. The people who are affected the most aren't actually the employees right now. That'll change as we get past July and in late summer. It's the small businesses. So if you're a small business owner, and if you're like me, I file as an S Corp. I pay myself a salary. So I can file and get loans to support that. And if you're not familiar with those, there's a loan called EIDL, EIDL, stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan is what that stands for. And then you also have the PPP. It's a paycheck protection program that we can file for as businesses if you run a business. And if you pay yourself a salary. The biggest issue that was disregarded and hasn't quite been captured yet by our state is the ability for a self-employed person who is a pass-through. They get paid as just part of their business. They don't pay themselves a salary. We still haven't quite yet figured out in New Mexico how those people can file for benefits. So they're really hurting. But that's going to change very soon here. There's also additional money coming in for people who have income under a certain category. And if their income is below a certain threshold, they get $1,200 coming their way. By the way, those checks are going out some of the people have already received those, some still haven't, and $500 per child. So that money is, many people have already received. That additional $600 the federal government is providing to unemployed people, that money is going out this week. So many of those people have received nothing for 3 weeks, and they're going to get a check of $1,800. And the reason I bring up this money that the federal government has thrown out there to small businesses and also to unemployed people is because that's keeping the economic pain down. As long as that money is continuing to come in, people are buying stuff. Now, they're not buying stuff from certain businesses. For example, my wife has a business that's called Santa Fe Lash and Beauty Bar. That's been shut down for 3 weeks because no one can go there because of social distancing and the governor's orders. And there are many businesses like that that have been negatively impacted. So if I look on the national scale and I look at the economic data there, that's very different than New Mexico. If we want to focus on New Mexico, let's talk about the biggest businesses in New Mexico. So the biggest business employer-wise in New Mexico, and this is 2017-18 data, is Christus St. Vincent. So they had, at the time of this, it was 2,132 employees. The next business is actually public, and it's the Santa Fe Public Schools that have about 1,500 employees. Then we have the city of Santa Fe, 1,446, and the county, 844. Then we go to other businesses like Christus that I'll call public or private businesses. They're not publicly funded like the school system. You've got the Peters Corporation, you have Buffalo Thunder, you've got a bunch of casinos, the Santa Fe Opera, Thornburg, I'll throw in there, hotels. So when you look at all these businesses that we have in Santa Fe, we basically have a tourism industry here. That's basically what we have. And so how does that affect us? Well, it can affect us in many different ways. Tourists are not coming to Santa Fe right now. They're not traveling at all. So that affects our hotels, it affects our restaurants, and it also affects our galleries. And of course, what the governor has dictated, where we have to stay sheltered, we can only go out for necessities, that hurts those businesses as well. And for very good reason, because we're trying to keep the coronavirus from spreading and killing people. In the state itself, we also have much of our money for spending comes from oil and gas, which is down significantly, and also from our gross receipts taxes. So we look at all those things and people get scared, and rightfully so. Many of you are probably scared, saying like, oh my golly, how am I going to keep my business running? Or I was on the verge of retirement, what am I going to do? Well, that's where you get down into individual pictures of how you run your life and how you run your business and how you plan to retire or get through this. And we will get through this like we get through everything else. And I guess I'm kind of an optimist there. I love to solve problems. I used to be a captain of a carrier. It was a helicopter carrier. I used to fly jets for the Navy, and I love solving problems. And this is just a problem, and it's a problem to solve. I focus on numbers, and I focus on the economy. And so you have to ask yourself, who's going to recover first? How is this recovery going to take place? And we really don't have a good answer to that until we know how the state's going to act and how we're going to react to the state's decisions. We obviously don't want people to get more coronavirus. We don't want it to spread, but we have an obligation to people who own businesses and are employed to help them get their job back. If we don't help them get those things going again, then we'll have devastating consequences down the road. And I hate to say it's like, you know, how many businesses should fail to how many people are protected? That's not my decision. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, but just realize there is things to weigh there. And that's what these governors will eventually do. When we get down to individuals and how we protect ourselves economically speaking, well, I'll talk about how I do that with my individual clients. Were my clients affected by what just happened? Absolutely. Now, I will also say this. My clients are affected less than probably a lot of people out there. And I don't mean that just because they're my clients and I know more than everybody else, because I don't. I know what you know. But I know enough to say this. Many of my clients, as they approach retirement, or the ones who are retired, my goal is to have them debt-free. If they're debt-free, they don't need as much money to live on. And to give you an example, I had a couple of clients at the beginning of the year pay off their home debts. Well, they're my raving fans right now because they took money out of a stock market that had done very, very well, paid off debt, and then when the stock market came down, not only do they not have to make those payments, they don't need as much money to live on, and they didn't lose as much. You want to be very well diversified. And what I mean by that is not just in the stock market. If you have a pension, congratulations. Those are kind of going away, but in our state of New Mexico, many people have pensions, teachers, people who retire from PERA, people who retire from the federal government. Those individuals will have pensions. If you don't have one, you can create one. You can keep your debt down, get rid of your debt if you can, at least all your debt but your house, hopefully. You could have additional income from rental income, being more diversified. Think about today, all the people out there that own properties that over the last couple of years decided to rent those properties for Airbnb. Wow, they're hurting today, aren't they? I mean, that's just a fact of life where we're at today. But that's not where all their money was. They could have money in the stock market as well. They could have a part-time job. Maybe they still have that job. Maybe they've been laid off and they're collecting unemployment. You'll all end up with Social Security, and the decisions you make there are significant. For people who start collecting Social Security at 62, if they had waited till age 70, they would be collecting 76% more. And these are things to think about if you haven't made these decisions yet. And so what I'm trying to get across today is we're going to see things like this happen in the future. I mean, there's predictions that, you know, this is going to become more commonplace. It'll just be a different coronavirus. And that may very well be true. And it may very well impact our economy vastly different than this one does. And none of us know that. But the point is, if you're concerned about the economy and you're concerned about what life's going to be like in your retirement, that's not necessarily a negative thing, and it will happen again. It's how we react to that and how we put plans in place. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We're working over Skype, or not Skype, excuse me, Zoom. Personally, for me, I'm still meeting clients. I have a business that isn't closed. Now, how do I meet those clients? I have a program called Ring Central, which is just like this, Zoom. I meet people over FaceTime. I meet people over Skype. I talk to people on the phone. My calendar is as busy as it was before we hit this shelter-in-place order from the governor. I don't know how your businesses are affected by that, but we can certainly adjust and accommodate as best we can, depending on the situation in the business that we have. Let me ask you that. Do any of you have questions about your business and how you can get them, get that back up and running? Or can I help you with any questions you might have about applying for these different loans that are out there and how these loans are structured and work? I know them very well. I've applied for them myself. I've helped my wife do that. I know clients who've received loans and what the payment process is on those. And if you need help there, I mean, I'm happy to answer those questions right now. And just, you can unmute yourself and ask me the question. You can certainly chat in the chat box if you'd like, but hey, for me, it's easier if you just unclick and ask the question verbally. Any of you? And so if I don't get questions, I'll ask. I'll pick on people. And you know who I'm going to pick on first? Yes, Karen.
Thank you so much for everything you're sharing. I really appreciate that. So the EIDL loans that were applied for earlier and the funds ran out, apparently, are they going to be replenished by this new batch of monies that was voted on yesterday?
Yes, they are, Karen. And so this is how it's working. And it's very interesting because there hasn't been a lot of idle payments, although I just talked to a person yesterday who received his idle loan. His loan was for $134,000. And this is the way the loan works, just so you know. It's a 30-year loan, and the interest rate is 3.75%. The loan money has to be used for your business. And the idle loan was meant to, if you remember when the federal government, and it was the Treasury Secretary, who I thought was so appropriate since he's the one responsible for this, he came out and said, the money will be in your account in 3 days. Well, 3 weeks later, people are starting to get the money, right? I mean, the emergency disaster is almost gone. I shouldn't say that, but the money was meant to come out very quickly, and it didn't. But it was an easy application process, which I'm sure you went through the SBA. There is more money funded in this extra $500 billion that will get approved, I think, today or tomorrow by the House of Representatives to fund those applications. So if you already have your application in, you should be in pretty darn good shape. And I want to talk about the EIDL with PPP because there is a relationship there. The PPP, Payment Protection Program, is for businesses. And the way that works is they look and they're going to give you a loan, which is basically 2.5 times the monthly wages that you pay in your business. So if you're self-employed, it's talking about just you 2.5 times. If you have other employees, you add all that together and they'll give you a loan for that amount. Now, part of that loan is forgiven. And this is how it works. And this is why it's very interesting to watch how businesses are adjusting to that loan. And even though Christus is too big for this, there are companies that are smaller that have 500 or less employees. And as long as they keep wages at 75% of where they were at pre-disaster, they will end up getting all those wages forgiven for 8 weeks worth of wages, not the 2.5 months, but 8 weeks worth of wages, plus utilities, plus if they rent or if they're paying a mortgage, they'll use the interest for the mortgage, or let's just talk rent. So as long as the mortgage payment, the interest on mortgage or the rent and the utilities are less than 25% of the overall amount, which means 75% has to at least be wages, that money's forgiven. You will never have to pay that back. So that's a wonderful thing. The rest of that loan through the PPP can be used over a 2-year period, and the interest rate is 1%. The first 6 months, you pay no interest on that at all, which is the same for EIDL. And so for EIDL, the point there is they were supposed to throw up to $10,000 into your account immediately. Now, that's what they said up front, and then they changed and said, per employee, you'll get $1,000. So if you're self-employed and you applied for the EIDL, like I did, okay, mine hasn't come through yet, but when it does, I'll get $1,000 put into my account. I don't have to pay that back. And then I'll have my EIDL loan. Now that $1,000 that I don't have to pay back is taken away from the PPP, just so you know. In other words, you don't get to double dip. If they're forgiving $1,000 in the EIDL, then they're going to forgive $1,000 less in the PPP. Does that make sense, Karen?
Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, John, I'm going to pick on you. You invited me. How's it affecting your business? Everyone doing reverse mortgages now to free up some cash?
A little, just a smidgen more, really not much change. Just developing how to do business in this environment with less face-to-face meetings and more, telephone and UPS. So just changing the way we do business, but really not much of an uptick yet, although, that could possibly happen as people are considering reverse mortgages more than they did before.
Yeah, I think you'll see that, John, and it's because they may retire earlier and they need the cash value of their home, or they'll refinance their properties because interest rates are so low. I know a lot of people are doing that. And Jolene, I guess you can't really do too much at this time, huh? Yeah, you're on mute still.
Got it.
There you go.
Yeah, mine shut down really early, the end of February, because the care facilities were the first to lock down.
Right. And so I hope you were able to go in there and apply for either the PPP or the EIDL. That's the whole point. This money is supposed to help people like us get through this time until we can go back to work.
Well, I decided not to do it because my overhead has always been really low, and if I'm not seeing patients, I don't have the supplies going out.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, though, Jolene, because it's an important question. If you go back to your 2019, you should be able to predict what your income was. And if you apply for that loan, they will reimburse you for that income for 8 weeks worth of your salary. And I would just think, I mean, it's just me. I'm just suggesting it might be worth doing that. And what I did for mine, and I was very pleased with this. I like working with local. I mean, I've just always been that way. So when I moved here 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, I opened an account with LANB. And of course, they've changed. They were bought out by a Texas company, and then they changed again to Enterprise Bank and Trust. But I will tell you, Enterprise Bank and Trust did a great job of helping me understand how to apply for these loans. And you do it through your bank. I'm not sure what bank you have, but if you're interested, I would just suggest there's nothing wrong with putting in a PPP application. In worst case, you'll get 8 weeks of whatever your salary would have been back to you at no cost. Because let's face it, you didn't shut your business down.
Yeah.
The government did, or the governor did, right? I mean, that's what shut it down, so you can't work. I would just encourage you to think about that, maybe apply for it. That's all.
Okay. I don't have employees. I'm still a one-man show. So
Okay, so are you? Well, let me ask then. Are you a pass-through? Do you do taxes for your business and for you, or just for you and Dan? How do you do that?
For business also. Yeah.
Okay, so in your business, is it an S corp?
LLC.
Okay, it's an LLC, but your business actually files its own return.
Right.
Well, in that return, it should have wages that it pays out to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Then you file it for your business like I did. My business pays me a wage. I let them know what my wage was. And at the end of the day, I will get 8 weeks of that back. Or I'll get a loan. In it will be 8 weeks that I can get back for my business, along with the utilities and along with what I pay on the mortgage for the building.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, because I've just been using personal savings to keep the business going so far.
Yeah. So just and for you, the EIDL, I wouldn't even bother with the EIDL. I'd apply for the PPP. It's a little bit more cumbersome, but it's not that impossible. I think, I did my wife's leases first. Got that done. And then mine was easier because I understood how to do it. But there's certain things that you need. And it's very straightforward, but you want to work through your bank for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You bet, Jolene. And pass my best to Dan, please.
Oh, thanks.
So Peter, I have a question. How is the government going to pay for all of this long term?
Well, that's a great question. I love that question because everyone thinks it's free money, and it isn't.
Somebody's got to pay.
Yeah, and who's that going to be? Well, there's $2.7 trillion more dollars we're going to put on our debt, put it on our kids. And since I'm a debt-free kind of person, that's what I believe in. I hate that. It just drives me crazy. We're the richest nation in the world, and we live on debt. It really does drive me crazy. So eventually, we're going to have to pay the piper on that. And like right now, we print money. So, just print more money. That makes it so easy, doesn't it? Well, eventually, here's what's going to happen. Eventually, when our government decides to sell bonds to fund their debt, countries are going to look at us and go like, I'm not going to buy that. You're going to pay me 1%? Pack sand. I want 6%. And since we have so much debt, if we refinance it at very low interest rates, that's going to protect us for 20 or 30 years. But at the end of the day, you have to pay your debt. And if no one's willing to take on your debt because you're a debtor nation, a significant debtor nation, then the only thing we can do is sell the debt at a higher interest rate. We've seen many countries do that in the past. That's what scares me. That's what keeps me up at night. And I don't look at it so much like I think it's going to affect us for decades, but it will affect our kids. We're leaving them with all this debt. And
okay, everybody, let's go back to the breathing exercises that we were learning before.
Yeah, no kidding. You're so right. And you know, that's down the road, but we do need to take care of that. And this is where it's twofold. It's the taxes we pay, and it's the money we spend. And a good example would be if I go back to just Santa Fe. Where does most of who are our biggest employers? They're not private industry, they're public. There's the county of Santa Fe, the city of Santa Fe, there's the teachers, there's, it's all government stuff. And I'm not saying we don't need that, we absolutely do, but we have to find a cost-effective way of funding the government and also having the private pay for that. And it needs a balance from both ends. Too much government isn't a good thing, money-wise, and paying too few taxes isn't a good thing otherwise. I'll go back to where during our lifetime, at least my lifetime, I think there's been 1 year where we actually brought more money in than we spent. And it was one of the last years when President Clinton was in office. And that was it. That was it. Every other time we've been underwater.
Peter,
Yes.
I have another question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me? Okay. So a new word to my vocabulary recently is seigniorage. Seigniorage. So this sort of piggybacks on what David was talking about. So we're not really borrowing this money. Who do we borrow it from? We're printing it. Is that accurate? We're making this money. The Treasury is printing it, because who would we borrow it from if we're already in debt? Can you clarify that for us?
Absolutely. We print the money because we have printing presses. I wish I had one, right? I'm sure the governor wishes she had one. But the federal government does. They print money. We're not on a gold standard. They can print as much as they want. So it's a fiat type economy. And the key is, great, a dollar's worth a dollar until it's not. So if we keep printing a bunch of money, the key is to run our government. It's not just printing of the money. Someone has to buy it. Someone has to buy this. That's why they sell these. They're called treasury bonds, treasury bills, treasury notes, mostly notes. Those are 10 to 20 year type monies. And people buy them. And I mean people meaning people in our country or countries like China. And right now, if you buy a 10-year treasury note, it's not even paying 1%. So we're getting the money and paying very, very low interest on it. But if you look at our budget or our where we spend our money for our country, you'll find that a lot of it goes to entitlement programs. And we are entitled to these programs. We pay into them, like Social Security. Social Security has about $2.8 trillion worth of money that we have all paid into, we, the workers. It's our account, it's not the government's. But when you look at the government's budget, a big chunk is Social Security, a big chunk is Medicare, then there's Medicaid, which is the safety net. And then the next biggest one is that we call it discretionary spending after that. It's our military. And then you get down to all the other things. But what's bigger than all those discretionaries happens to be what we're spending on our debt, because we have so much debt. And we can't get rid of that. Every year, that money that comes into the government, we have to pay the interest on our debt. That's what we have to do. And it's not as high as it used to be in the past, but only because interest rates are so low. But that'll change over time. And once we get through all this, and we're not talking 2021 or 2022, but into the future, there'll be a reckoning to where we're going to have to, inflation's going to start coming up. And when it does, this money that we print, that people buy to help fund our government, we'll have to pay them a higher interest rate. And then the payments are going to balloon. It's like for us, if you put it into a microcosm, let's say you buy a home on a balloon loan, if you remember those, where you're paying an interest rate and a principal for, let's say, 5 or 10 years, and then at the end you have to refinance. Well, if you can refinance today at 2% or 3%, it'd be great. But if you had to refinance in 1983 at 10%, that wouldn't be a good thing. And eventually we have to refinance our debt or pay it off. That's the bottom line. Anyone else?
I guess real quick, have any of our bonds been downgraded already?
Well, that's an interesting point. You know, you could say we're the only AAA bond in the world, right? That's what they like to say. Although there was a company that downgraded us to AA+. And
I thought.
so yes, and that happened. I don't remember exactly what year that happened, but it was a while ago. It was during the 2007-8 timeframe when we went through that previous crisis, and there's been no changes since then. We're considered the safest place to invest money, and that's why people buy our bonds at such a low interest rate. But if we don't get our spending under control, or I shouldn't say just spending, it's tax and spending under control, you know, eventually we're going to be downgraded.
Yeah, I worked for Thornburg at that time, and it wasn't good. And I can't believe that hasn't happened yet again. But good.
Yeah, it's always hard, because if you think about the people who make these decisions, we're talking the House of Representatives, the Senate, the executive branch. Whenever we try to take money away from people, like by paying higher taxes, they don't get our vote. It's like right now, there's some very easy solutions to fix, and I don't mean it's broken. Our Social Security program is better than 80% of pensions, including ours in New Mexico. So it's very solvent, but it does need to change somewhat. And we can't, you know, Congress needs to change it. Until the pain threshold hits them, they're not going to change it, because they don't want to change it and lose their opportunity to be reelected. But eventually they will. And this thing with the Social Security isn't much different than what happened to us in the 80s, for those of us who remember it. We probably don't, because we didn't care. We weren't going to be collecting for a while. But they made big changes in the 81, 83 timeframe that we're living with today, even with the full retirement age shifting to 67, that we're in the midst of going through that today. And they were almost out of money in 83. They had like 1 month of trust money left. And now we have $2.8 trillion, but you know, we need to make changes, and we will. I have great faith in that it does happen. It's just slow, because they only react when they have to, instead of being a little bit more upfront and doing it. The sooner you make those changes, the better off we'll all be.
And of course, I can't resist this, but in '83, didn't we have a Republican president as well, Ronald Reagan?
Yeah, absolutely. Carter had just left. Reagan was in office.
Just saying, it seems consistent that Democrats tend to lower the debt and Republicans complain about it more. And I won't be political anymore, but that seems consistent.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of my concerns is that come to cases, like you said, you've either got to develop more income through taxes or revenue, or you've got to reduce spending. And we all know what gets cut first, and those are the entitlement programs. And I hope we don't see long-term fallout of reduction in city, county, state, federal benefits, entitlement programs for the people who are in need. And I mean, we all work with the senior population, and
Right.
there are a lot of programs I can see potentially Meals on Wheels, senior centers closing, reducing staff, some of the other programs cutting their budget. So this is where I would be concerned.
That is of concern, and it does seem like no one says when it goes to military, how are we going to pay this back? It's
Right.
when it.
You know, you bring up great points. I mean, I was a budget analyst for the Navy and for the Department of Defense, working at the Pentagon. And, you know, they don't need to balance anything. They don't need to bring in any income. They just spend. And, you know, I worked on many of those programs, and I didn't like what I saw. They weren't efficient. You know, it was all a money grab, whether it was the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, or the Marines. They all just took care of themselves. And I think what we'll find is where the real problems are going to come in isn't so much going to be when our economy starts to recover and our businesses start getting healthy again. It's going to be the money that our state spends. I mean, they're going to take a big hit in, you know, gross receipts tax, oil revenue. They're paying, they're getting subsidized for a lot of it, but they're paying this money out to people right now who are unemployed. It's going to have a tremendous impact. And now, one thing I will say is that it's not well run. I mean, and a great example is Workforce Solutions. And it's a great program, but it isn't well run, and it's because they don't have enough money and they don't have enough technology to run it well. As a matter of fact, that's why sole proprietors right now still can't file for unemployment months after this has happened, because their system won't provide that resource. And I really think our governments, state, federal, and localities, municipalities, really need to focus on technology. We spend an awful lot of money on people. And quite frankly, technology can replace a lot of that. And I'm not saying people shouldn't have jobs. That's not where I'm going at all with this. But they can be better utilized in different segments of our society, because we can certainly cut down costs and still provide services, because those services are needed. And the better you know, we can find more efficient ways to provide these services, the better we'll all be.
Yeah, that's quite hair-raising what you just said, Peter. If New Mexico, because we can only apply for the pandemic unemployment assistance through Workforce Solutions, right?
That's correct. Well, no. So let me rephrase that. The PPP, which is the Payment Protection Program, and EIDL are through the SBA. It's the unemployment you have to do through Workforce Solutions.
Yeah, and it has to be through our state. So if our state can't get their act together to support Workforce Solutions, that means a lot of people that need those funds may not get those funds. Are they working on that now?
Right, or by the time they get them, they're beyond need. You know, they're broke and now don't have their money yet, and that's the problem. And so, generally speaking, before the crisis, if you ran your own business, if you're a sole proprietor, where what I mean by that is you're filing one tax return. It's your personal joint tax return. The money from the business just comes in. That's like my wife. That's what happens. The money just comes in. And so she's a sole proprietor. And so there was no way to file for unemployment. You couldn't as a sole proprietor. But because of COVID-19, in the federal government, House of Representatives, Senate, and the executive branch said, hey, we want these sole proprietors to be able to be made whole, because we're forcing them not to work. So we're going to allow them to apply for unemployment. Well, in our state, we're still screwed up. We haven't fixed that yet. So these people don't have income. They're paying their business expenses, and some of them are paying their own household benefits out of that. There's no money, and they can't apply yet. So that's what we need to fix, those type things. And every state does it different because they run their own states. I think what will happen is whenever we experience a major catastrophe like we're doing now, whether it's created by a virus or something else, we find ways to fix it and to be more efficient. And that's what we need to do. And I think our governor's all over that. That's what she wants to do. She's trying very hard to do that. Her toughest job is going to be, how do we open New Mexico back up? What are the parameters? Are we going to go with what the government says, federal government? Are we going to come up with something else? And she does owe us that, because we need to know how we're going to recreate our businesses as we move forward and how we can do that. And I'm looking forward to her. I figure sometime this week she's going to provide that to us.
She's actually doing an update today at 3 o'clock on one of the news channels. She's going to have a press conference at 3, is my understanding.
Yeah, and I hope that's where she's going to share it. That would be great.
Until then, we have to drive to Georgia to get our tattoos. It just, it hurts me.
I'll do one for you, Dee Dee.
Oh, thanks.
Pop the pen right
It's
here.
funny because I had my wife cut my hair the other day and it came out pretty darn good. And I said, hey, you're hired.
Yeah, well, you've noticed I've got a ball cap on,
Yes,
and there's
I
a
do.
reason for that. It was either this or barrettes. So, yeah, and everybody's gonna be lined up around the block just to get a haircut. That's the priority. So, okay. Well, does anybody have any other questions for Peter or anything else we want to talk about?
But do you think that there's going to be a special session of our legislature called in only because the budget that was approved actually begins July 1st? And there probably needs to be modification between now and then, and that does affect our constituents, if you
I'll
will.
tell you, 100% they're going to meet. The question is when.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that whole budget maybe have to be rewritten.
I work for the department.
And that's where I get scared that things are going to get cut.
That's where I'm scared too.
It will. I promise you it will. And the question is, where are they going to cut?
Yep.
That's the key.
So, okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Peter. I think this was a great help to hear. And I think the most important thing you said is we will get through this. It will take time. But chin up and soldier on, everybody. Hopefully, maybe today at 3 we'll have a little more information about when we can start to think about resuming business as normal, if there ever was a normal here in New Mexico. But anyway, so again, next luncheon, May 12th, we'll do online again, and Mayor Weber is going to join us. So thank you all for doing this, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Peter.
Great to see you, everybody.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Ken.
Yes.
Peter.
Thanks, David, again. Happy Earth Day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.